You wake up. No alarm. The sun is doing that job for you. You're not late for anything because nothing starts at a specific time. There's no calendar app buzzing with 3 meetings before lunch. You stretch. Someone nearby is already up, quietly working on a tool. Someone else is still asleep. Nobody cares. By the time the average modern adult retires, they'll have logged somewhere around 90,000 hours of work over their lifetime. That's a rough, often cited estimate, not an exact figure. Now sit with this. Some researchers studying living hunter-gatherer societies have clocked subsistence work, the actual hours spent getting food and meeting basic needs, at roughly 1,000 to 1,400 hours a year, less than half of what a standard 40-hour-a-week job demands. For most of the time our species has existed, work looked nothing like what you do today. And the deeper you dig into the evidence, the stranger and more uncomfortable that comparison gets. Let's start with the receipts, because this isn't vibes, it's fieldwork. Anthropologist Frank Marlowe spent years living with and studying the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last populations on Earth still subsisting primarily through hunting and gathering. In his research, compiled most thoroughly in his 2010 book on the Hadza, he found that adults typically spent somewhere in the range of 4 to 6 hours a day on actual subsistence activities, foraging, hunting, processing food. Not 12, not 14, 4 to 6. Go back further to the 1960s and you'll find James Woodburn's early ethnographic work on the Hadza describing a population that wasn't desperately scraping by. They had what looked like a comfortable margin of leisure time built into daily life. Now here's where people get skeptical and honestly fair. Okay, but the Hadza today aren't cut off from the modern world. Maybe this isn't what ancient humans actually experienced. That's a legitimate pushback, so let's check it against a completely different kind of evidence: bones. Bioarchaeologists who study skeletal remains from the transition out of foraging life have repeatedly found the same pattern. Populations that were predominantly hunter-gatherers tend to show denser, more robust bone structure and fewer markers of chronic nutritional stress than the farming populations that came after them. A landmark academic collection edited by George Armalagos and Mark Nathan Cohen, Paleopathology at the Origins of Agriculture, compiled case after case from sites across the globe showing increased enamel defects, more frequent signs of anemia, and more localized joint degeneration in early farming populations compared to the foragers who preceded them in the same regions. Skeletal evidence from the Eastern Mediterranean around the agricultural transition, drawing especially on physical anthropologist J. Lawrence Angel's work, shows something striking. Average adult height appears to drop noticeably by several centimeters in the populations that shifted to farming compared to the foragers before them. That's not a lifestyle preference showing up in bone. That's a body under more sustained stress. So you've got two independent lines of evidence: living people's daily schedules and dead people's skeletons, pointing the same direction. That's not proof of paradise. It's a pattern. Here's the part that really should bother you, in a good way. If early humans were grinding 14-hour days just to stay alive, they wouldn't have had time for art. And yet, go to Sungur, an Upper Paleolithic burial site in Russia, dated to roughly 34,000 to 30,000 years ago. That range is still debated among researchers. Archaeologists excavating there found burials containing an estimated 3,000 to 13,000 individually carved mammoth ivory beads per body, depending on the burial. Each bead, by replication studies done by archaeologists trying to recreate the process, takes a meaningful chunk of time to carve and drill by hand. We're talking potentially tens of minutes per bead, multiplied by thousands. Someone, or more likely a community, invested an almost absurd number of collective hours decorating the dead. Mammoth ivory has zero nutritional or survival value. You can't eat a bead. Then there's Deep Kloof Rock Shelter in South Africa, where archaeologists uncovered engraved ostrich eggshell fragments dated to roughly 60,000 years ago, geometric crosshatch patterns, deliberately and repeatedly etched, apparently used as containers, but decorated far beyond what function required. You don't need a pattern to hold water. You need one if you want it to mean something, or look like something, or belong to someone. And at Isturitz Cave in southwestern France, archaeologists have recovered bird bone flutes made from vulture wing bones, dated to somewhere around 35,000 years ago, give or take. Carving precise, evenly spaced finger holes into hollow bird bone without modern tools is not a quick job. It produces something with exactly one use: sound. Music. Nothing you can hunt with it. Nothing you can eat because of it. Every one of these, the beads, the engravings, the flutes, required hours of focused, voluntary, non-survival labor. Nobody was forced to make them. There was no boss assigning a quota of ostrich eggshell engravings per week. People did this because they had the time, the energy, and this is the part that's easy to forget, the inclination. So let's build the day. Not a fantasy. A composite stitched together from the time-use data and the archaeology, with the honest caveat that any reconstruction like this is an informed estimate, not a transcript. You wake with the light. No urgency. Morning is for moving, maybe 2 or 3 hours of foraging, tracking, digging roots, checking traps, depending on the season and what the land's giving up that week. You're not racing a clock. You're reading weather, animal behavior, plant cycles. This is skilled work, deeply skilled, but it's task-based, not time-based. When a task is done, it's done. Midday, heat climbs, and activity drops with it. This is rest. Shade. Maybe on up. Tool maintenance, resharpening a point, mending a cord, the kind of slow manual work that doubles as a quiet, almost meditative pause. Researcher Polly Wiesner, in a 2014 study published in PNAS examining Jew/Hoansi conversation patterns, found something genuinely interesting. Daytime talk among the Jew/Hoansi tended to skew toward practical matters: economics, complaints, coordination, the logistics of getting through the day. But nighttime conversation, around the fire, shifted dramatically towards stories about distant relatives, about the past, about shared myths and social ties stretching across the wider group. So picture that fire. Evening comes, work stops almost entirely, and people gather. Someone tells a story you've heard 50 times and somehow still want to hear again. Kids fall asleep mid-laugh. An adult hums something half a tune, the kind of half-formed music that somewhere else on some other night, in some other generation, eventually got carved into a vulture bone and played on purpose. Sleep isn't scheduled either. There's research, including work by sleep scientist Jerome Siegel, studying several remaining foraging and small-scale societies, suggesting these populations don't sleep dramatically more than industrialized people do in raw hours. But their sleep timing is far less rigid and far more tied to actual darkness and temperature than to any external clock. You don't fight your body. You follow it. No performance review. No commute. No emails arriving at 11 p.m. Just a day shaped by light, hunger, and other people. So here's the obvious question. If this was the baseline for so long, what happened? Agriculture didn't trap people in more work because farming itself is evil. It trapped people because of what farming does mechanically to a population over time. Settled agricultural life meant softer, calorie-dense weaning foods, porridges, and gruels, which multiple researchers studying the agricultural transition have argued likely allowed mothers to wean children earlier than was typical in mobile foraging life. Earlier weaning generally means shorter intervals between births. Shorter birth intervals mean faster population growth. Faster population growth means more mouths than the existing land can support through foraging, which locks the population further into farming, because there's no longer enough wild food nearby to fall back on. Farming also produces something foraging mostly doesn't: storable surplus. Grain sits in a pit. Grain can be owned. Grain can be hoarded, stolen, taxed, and inherited. Once you have a storable surplus, you get specialization. Some people farm, some defend the grain, some start managing who gets how much. That's the seed of hierarchy, of property, of debt, of the first bosses. And the skeletons back this up. Across multiple regions studied in the bioarchaeological literature, the shift to agriculture correlates with increased signs of repetitive strain joint damage, more frequent dental disease tied to carbohydrate-heavy diets, higher markers of infectious disease consistent with crowded, settled living, and that height decline we already mentioned. Farming fed more people. It did not, on the skeletal evidence, make those people healthier or freer. It made them more numerous and more stuck. So look at your week. The alarm, the commute, the inbox, the 90,000 hours, give or take, that you'll spend over a lifetime doing work that, for the vast majority of human history, simply did not exist in that form. None of this means you should torch your calendar and go live in the woods. That's not the point, and honestly, modern life buys you things no Camp could: medicine, lifespan, choice in who you become. But it's worth knowing that the grind isn't the natural state of being human. It's a 12,000-year-old experiment we're all still running. Maybe freedom was never about having more. Maybe it was just having your afternoons back.